Welcome back, everybody, to the Little Less Fear podcast. I'm super duper excited to reintroduce and welcome back Ryan Ray Harbuck, who has her new book. It's called "When I Grow Up, I Want to Be a Chair." It just came out. Please tell us about your book. This book journey begin, and how long did it take you? Give us all the great information on it, please.
Yeah, thank you, Lena. Well, first of all, I'm like super excited to meet with you again. Um,
Yes.
you were sort of like the first podcaster I was able to chat with when I started this
Awesome.
journey. And so it's like really fun to now come back now that it's, I guess, done and out in the world to kind of
Yes.
like revisit what's going on and actually be able to talk more about my book to you, because at that point when we
You were
took
still in the process. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I had no idea what was going on.
Yeah, I know that feeling. So tell us about your journey for the people listening for the first time. How did this book even come about?
So, it's really kind of funny for me because I don't have a moment in my memory where I decided to write a book. And this is something that I've been compiling stories from my life over the last probably 15 years. I probably first wrote, my first story in there. And I think it sort of just like fell into place because I was somebody that always enjoyed writing. I wouldn't have ever said I was a writer. I was a biology major in college, and but I looking back now, writing was something that I always did. Whether it was having a blog or just writing in a journal or what have you, I was always doing it. And
Mm.
so for me to just sit down and start writing a story about my life, it wasn't that big of a deal to me. And so, but I think I after, a year or 2 years, I started to realize like I have a lot of stories here, and I was um, writing them just based off of how I felt, or based off of a lesson I had at the moment or needed. And so when I actually sat down and decided like this, I want this to be a book and I want it to be published and I want other people to read it, I had a lot of work to do because I did not write it chronologically. I wrote
Yeah.
it just about how I was feeling. And so once I actually decided that I wanted it to be a real book, I had to go back. I put all the chapter titles on sticky notes. And I had this like really big whiteboard, and I sat there for an hour and tried to put them all where they should actually go, all these stories.
Yeah.
And originally I was going to try to actually publish it out of order because I thought it was very creative and very much, how it was inspired by me, but it just became, in terms of like actually somebody trying to read it and follow along, it wouldn't have worked. And so just kind of going through it, like once I actually organized all the stories, then it was like, oh, well, okay, well, then I need to put something about this person here, in this later chapter, so readers actually know what happened to this person. And
Sure.
so then it became a lot more about like writing a full length book, a memoir. I think that because it took me so long to write it, when I originally decided that I wanted to publish it, I remember that I didn't have it finished, but I remember that I wrote down what I wanted, the rest of the chapters to be. And what's really funny is looking back now, I don't think any of those chapters exist because over the course of a dozen plus years, your life changes. And so
Exactly.
all of a sudden my chapters were changing because of the experiences I was having in my life.
Yes.
And so it became like, not only was it like a really cathartic process to constantly be living and then reflecting and writing about it all, but it was also just a very fluid process. It was ever changing. I was going to write about this, and now that doesn't seem so relevant anymore. And yeah, and so it did. I think it was finally when, so I have two babies at home. I have an 8-year-old and a 3-year-old. He's 3 now. He had a birthday since we talked. And it was when I was pregnant with my youngest. That's when I really, really got serious about it and decided that I think a lot of moms can understand, like, being a mom is one of the best treasures and gifts, but it also takes so much
Of your
of
time.
your own self Yeah.
Right.
Not just time, but there's like this piece of self that kind of gets pushed away. It's not gone, but it's not as important anymore. And so, and I was recognizing that being pregnant. And so that's when I got very serious about like, I'm going to finish this. I'm going to put it in the world. I owe this to myself. I've been putting so much of my own effort and energy into it. And so that's when I really, really decided and got serious. But then it was another 2 years before I actually published the thing.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the book starts everything from birth to now?
I think the youngest that I actually um, talk about in my book is being about 4.
Okay.
And it does kind of jump around slightly. It does start off, the book starts off with talking about me being in the hospital after having a car accident and being paralyzed and how the emotions there. And then it kind of goes from there and moves on and talks a little bit more about how I became paralyzed and what happened that night and how it changed not my life but everybody's life. And then it kind of continues on through. I was 16 when my accident happened, so it talks about just what a normal teenager feels like versus what somebody that's now this hyper aware teenager that lost a lot but still could have so much, and how to change your perspective. And then kind of just takes off from there and follows the rest of my journey so far.
Would you say that your book was therapeutic writing it, or would you say that it was actually difficult? Because I know when I was going through it, there were some chapters that I was just crying, and I'm like, I don't know if I could do this, you know. But then when it was done, it was like, you know, like I could breathe. Did you
Right.
kind of have go through the same stuff?
I have so much of that. So it was obviously very therapeutic because I just started writing it. There wasn't a lot of thought process. It was like there were these stories and these emotions inside of me that needed a home, and I wasn't willing to be that home for it anymore. And so that kind of helped me process through a lot of things that I've gone through. But I also, in saying that, I think there were stories of mine that were so hard to get out that there's actually a chapter in my book that's written as a diary, as a bunch of diary entries. And it's funny because I've talked to multiple people about that. And every single person that I've talked to thought they were real diary entries, but they weren't. They were just, it was like the only way that I could get out what was inside of me was to write it as a diary entry. And so that whole chapter is just me finding a bunch of diary entries from my teens all the way to like my early 20s. And it was just, I think because it was all so hard for me to write it any other way, that I had to write it like that 16-year-old self or that 14-year-old self, because that's where I knew to emote from, I guess.
And that's very creative too. So I'm sure that using that creative process was therapeutic as well.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And when you get into that zone, it's almost as if it kind of comes out a little more freely too.
One of my favorite chapters I would say probably my most creative chapter is written as a recipe. And
What?
it's just a short little chapter. Oh my gosh, I'm not even going to get the name of it right because it's so convoluted. It's my acceptance of your acceptance of accepting me, a recipe. And so
Wow.
it goes through and it talks about just like small little times in my life where my acceptance of myself or somebody else's acceptance of me, physically being in a wheelchair, what that has done in terms of how that has made me feel, how that has impacted me, how that has impacted somebody else. Because being a very physical and visible disability, I think it's both easier and harder to live with.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's easier because people expect, there to be some challenges,
Mm-hmm.
and there are. But I also think that it's harder because then people expect there to be challenges.
Right.
By the same token. Yeah, and so that was just a fun chapter to write, to just sort of give a reader a little idea of what it's like to have a physical disability, like being in a wheelchair, being paralyzed.
Tell us about the title. I love the title, by the way, but tell us how that came to be.
So when I grew up, I want to be a chair. There is a chapter in my book called To Be a Chair, and it's all about when I was preschool age. I actually told my parents, and I'm not kidding, that I wanted to be a chair when I grew up. And
Wow.
right. And so, was that something that I was having like,
Like a premonition almost.
right, right. Or, that I sort of rationalized it in the sense that I had a baby sister at the time, and perhaps like nobody would let me hold her. And I thought if I was a chair, they would let me hold her, something like that.
Hmm.
I don't really know, but I, but it's kind of like a play on words, but it's not, it's a true story.
Sure.
And,
Right, right.
and so it was really easy for that to become the title of my book. And it's been able, as I've sort of like matured through the process of writing this book, I've learned that that chair is a very metaphoric thing that anybody can really relate to. And in the back blurb of my book, it says, "What's your chair?" It says everybody has a chair, something that you're either bound to or unwillingly defines you. And so what do you do with that chair, and what
Right.
is your chair? And so and to be honest, that kind of came about last minute. I had a whole other blurb written up, and even in layout form, I had the graphic artist put that blurb up on the what the back cover was going to be. And I looked at it and I said, it's not right. I need to rewrite it. And so and that's when I sat down and thought, like, what is my book? What do I really, really want
Yeah.
people to take out of it, and to understand? And I really wanted people to understand that it's so much not about a chair as much as it is about a chair, and that I'm not the only one that has that. And so that's sort of, like I said, my own individual process of understanding what I was writing matured throughout. And I realized that there were a lot of themes and notions that I was trying to give to the world, and I didn't even know it.
Right. Up until like towards the end, right?
Till after go time.
What was the biggest struggle in writing your memoir?
um, like actually having it out in the world, honestly, the biggest
Yeah.
struggle, because I knew there were a lot of things in there that were really painful, that were really private. And I am, fairly introverted to begin with. I'd say I have a lot of people that I talk to in my life that are friends or, acquaintances. And I didn't even stop for 1 second and think about anybody actually reading my book. And I think when it came down to it, I knew that what was in it was so important that if I actually spent the time to think about it, I wouldn't have done it. And
Yeah.
so I just didn't let myself really think.
Overly think.
Yeah, and I just didn't let myself think about, like, well, what happens when the PTO mom is reading your book, or whatever.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
because I think that I might have scared myself off. And so I didn't. Since it's been out in the world, and people have been reading it, I have had a lot of people come to me and talk to me about how brave I am for having it out there.
Oh
And
yeah.
I have very like mixed emotions about that, because I don't feel brave. I feel scared.
Yeah.
And I feel, but I just like I said, I didn't let myself think too hard on it, because it
But that
was,
is bravery though. Going through your fears.
I suppose. I'm not sure I'm through them yet.
Right. Well, yeah, I think we'll always have some fears going through life, but so what other comments are you getting? You're getting that you're brave, and what other comments are you getting?
I've heard that my book is a quick read for most people, and that it's a very universal read, that people are able to pick things specifically for themselves out of it, which I am like very, very happy about. Um, I will be honest with you, my dream is for somebody to pick it up and think it's a work of fiction. That's like, I don't know why, but that is like my ultimate dream. I just want somebody randomly to pick it up somewhere and be like, oh, this is a really nice novel. And
Wow.
I don't know.
Why the fiction dream?
I think because I I really enjoy being a writer, and it just so happened that I wrote my story. I almost wish that it was not true because of how, you know, emotional and painful it can be at times, and how um, it's a whole another beast when, thankfully I haven't had a bad review yet, but it's going to happen, right? It happens to everyone. I'm going to have a bad review, and it's not just going to be because I'm a bad writer. It's going to be like, well, this is my personal life in this book that you just said was terrible.
Yeah. Well, you know what, Ryan, I personally feel that if it's ever a bad review, which I doubt you'll ever get a bad review, but if you should get a bad review, or even if I get a bad review, it's really their state of mind and where they're at, because you're coming from a wholesome, your higher self, pure love, and there's no bad review in that.
Yeah.
So there's only love to give back when you're giving love. So
Yeah.
I really feel that you're gonna continue to get incredible 5-star readings, and I'm all for it. Keep going.
Well,
Do you
thank you.
think, now that you've completed your memoir, do you think you're gonna write again? And what about writing something fiction?
Yeah, it's I would say the last few months of finalizing my book, I really, really just fell in love with writing. I really did. And once my book was out in editing and it was done and there was nothing left for me to write, I found myself writing and figuring out, like, I was like, well, what's a flash fiction story? I'm going to look that up. What's a microfiction story? And so I started writing some pieces, and I had
Excellent.
just I think about a month ago, I had a microfiction piece, so a piece that was 150 words put into a literary magazine, a very small one, but I was very excited about that.
That's
Um,
fun too.
yeah, and I've submitted a couple other things elsewhere and haven't really gotten anything yet, but I'm excited to continue to play around with it. I have this like nagging like button that keeps going off about a fiction novel that I would like to write, but it's just like it's not time yet. Haven't put it all together. So I'm gonna kind of like hold on to that for a little bit. And I did actually, we were just on a big road trip, our whole family, and on one of the long car rides, I wrote a children's book with the same title of my book. And it's not really, it doesn't follow the same stories necessarily. That would not be a good children's book, but it's about, like a little kid who tells everybody that when they grow up, they want to be a chair, and what everybody's reaction is to that. And so I may try to get that published next. I don't know.
I
It's
think that sounds incredible.
Thank
I
you.
mean, there's definitely something gracious and glorious in the feeling of creating stories, for sure.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
children's books, right?
What
Is that like a children's book or a children's fiction that you're
Yeah, the one that I've kind of rough drafted is would be like akin to like a nice little bedtime story, like a little short. It rhymes, that
that
kind of.
sounds amazing.
Yeah.
So what's the biggest takeaway that you want your readers to get from your book?
Like I mentioned before, realizing that everybody has a chair. It doesn't have to be a wheelchair. It doesn't have to be something physical, but everybody has something that either feels like it's holding them back, it's binding them to something that's not wholesome for themselves, and something that identifies them that they didn't necessarily sign up for. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a big notion. I didn't sign up to be a disabled person or whatever, but that's who I am, and that's
Right.
life. And you either learn to accept and appreciate what it offers to you to move
Mm-hmm.
forward, or you don't, and then the possibilities start to diminish.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. So how can our readers, our viewers, and our watchers find you? Where can we find your book?
Yes, please. It's all over Amazon. You can get a paperback copy. You can get a Kindle copy. If you have Kindle Unlimited, it is one of those borrowed books. I hope to be doing an audiobook soon. I just haven't gotten my feet wet with that quite yet. And I do have a website, my full name, ryanraeharbuck.com, if you would like to look for anything else related to me.
And social media, do you use that to market yourself as well, or is that personal?
No, I absolutely do. My Instagram primarily would be a great way to follow my writing, my book, what I'm up to.
And I'll give all the information too when I post everything up. So thank you so much for your time. When
Thank
I grow
you.
up, I want to be a chair, available now on Amazon. Author Rae Harbuck, thank you so much for shedding your light, sharing your light, and all of your glorious nature. Thank you so much for being awesome. And I look forward to seeing where you're at in a few more months, and maybe we could touch
Yeah.
base again.
Yeah, I'd love to check in again.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ryan.
Yeah, have a great one.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.